This is the lecture on the individualized education programs. This is part 3. My name is Dr. George Giuliani from Hofstra University. And again, this is part 3 of our lectures regarding the IEP. And we've been talking about the required components of the IEP. We've been through the first 3 required components. And now we go to the 4th required component of the IEP, which is the IEP must contain a statement of the special education placement, related services, and assistive technology services to be provided. Now, related services is a very specific lecture that we'll cover in another area of this course. So you can review that lecture or see that lecture if you haven't seen it, as well as educational placement. If you haven't seen the lecture on least restrictive environment, you can go to that lecture. So I'm not going to address what related services are here, nor am I going to address least restrictive environment because those are lectures within themselves. So the IEP has to contain a statement of the special ed placement, the related services, and assistive technology services to be provided. So I want to talk for a few minutes about assistive technology. The IEP must clearly outline assistive technology devices, or AT, needed to support the student. The term assistive technology device is actually defined in IDEA, and it means any item, piece of equipment, or product that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of a child with a disability. Again, any item, piece of equipment, or product that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a child with disabilities. So what are some examples of assistive technology? Well, for example, a child using an iPad to be able to speak or to be able to communicate or to express him or herself. A calculator for mathematical purposes, pencil grips, computers are one that are used all the time now, closed circuit televisions, communication boards, or any kind of specialized software. So when you think about an assistive technology device, it actually is exactly what it sounds like. It's a device that assists the student. It's a technology device that will assist the student with a disability. And assistive technology is very important because for some students, without assistive technology, they would not have access to or be able to benefit from their educational program. So very often when we're developing the IEP of the child, we're looking very specifically at what assistive technology devices are needed for this child to have educational benefit within his or her program. Now, interestingly, assistive technology devices are purchased by the school district. They belong to the school district. So any assistive technology devices that are purchased by the school district belong to the district. Distribution and use of devices under the school district's control, as long as the needs designated in the IEP are being met. Again, the distribution and use of devices are under the district's control. It's the responsibility of the district. And this is important because in general, the school district is responsible for the repair and maintenance of assistive technology devices described in the IEP. So when a school district gives a child with a disability a specific device, whether it's a laptop computer, whether it's an iPad, whether it's a calculator, a pencil grip, whatever it might be, that distribution and the use of the devices are under the district's control as long as the needs designated in the IEP are being met. So in general, the school district is the one that's responsible for repairing and maintaining the assistive technology device as described in the IEP. The 5th required component of the IEP states the following. The IEP must also, if such is the case, contain an explanation for why a child with a disability will not participate with children without disabilities in the general education classroom and activities. This component of the IEP is referred to as the extent of non-participation because the assumption in IDEA is that students with disabilities should, in most cases, be educated with their peers. So again, if a child with a disability is not going to be participating with children without disabilities in the general ed classroom and or activities, we have to be able to explain that in the IEP. So if the child with a disability is not being educated with those without disabilities in the gen ed classroom or in other activities, we have to, in the IEP, make the case for it, have an explanation for it. And this is the extent of non-participation in the IEP. So we have to explain why the child is not participating with those children without disabilities in the gen ed classroom. The extent of non-participation highlights the value that IDEA places on educating children with disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate with children without disabilities. So, if a child's IEP places the child outside of the regular class, involvement in the gen ed curriculum, and or participation in extracurricular or non-academic activities, the IEP must explain why. So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line here to understand is that under the federal law, you can educate children with disabilities children with disabilities without those with disabilities. We can have special schools. We can have special programs. We can have adaptive PE. We can have all different kinds of special ed programs for children. But if those kids are not being educated with the gen ed population, there just needs to be an explanation as to why this is the case. Again, the extent of non-participation, and this has to be in the IEP. The sixth required component of the IEP states that there must be a statement of any accommodations or modifications in the administration of state or district-wide assessments of student achievements. Again, there has to be a statement of any accommodations or modifications in the administration of state or district-wide assessment of student achievement. Now, there are four common types of state or district-wide testing accommodations, okay, accommodations. First, there's setting accommodation. And a setting accommodation is where the student might need to take a test in a separate testing location instead of with an entire general education class. So we're going to change the setting for the child when it comes to testing. A response accommodation. A response accommodation, for example, is the student might need to answer questions with a laptop or an iPad instead of a pencil and paper or Scantron. So we're going to change how the child responds to the test as opposed to how the other children are responding. The third type of accommodation is a timing accommodation. So for example, the student might need extended time to take the test. So if everyone in the class gets an hour, this student might need 90 minutes. And the fourth type of accommodation is a presentation accommodation. The student might need someone to read him or her the test instead of having to have it, or the student having to read it like everyone else. So again, when you're talking about accommodations for testing, there can be setting accommodations, so the student might need to take the test in a separate location. A response accommodation where the student might need to answer the questions differently, like with a laptop or an iPad, instead of with pencil and Scantron. There could be a timing accommodations where the student gets extended time or more time than other students, or a presentation accommodation where the student might need someone to read him or her the test instead of having to read it like everyone else. Those are the four most common types of state or district-wide testing accommodations for a child. Now, if the IEP determines that the child will not participate at all in state or district-wide assessment, the IEP needs to contain a statement as to why the assessment is not appropriate and the reason why a selected alternate assessment is appropriate for the child. So again, think of these state and district-wide tests. Think of these state exams that we're talking about, ELAs and other types of state tests. All kids have to take these particular types of tests. For students with disabilities, they may need various accommodations like we just discussed. But for some children, taking this test would be completely inappropriate. The child with a severe intellectual disability, or the nonverbal child with autism who is not relating or has difficulty with reading or can't sit down and take an actual exam. There's no way this child is going to be able to take a statewide test. So if that is the case, the IEP needs to contain a statement as to why the assessment is not appropriate for this child with a disability. And it has to explain why a different type of alternate assessment will be used, will be more appropriate for this particular child. That ends this lecture on required components of the IEP. You can now go to part 4.